Hey guys, it's Adam from LUCIDPIXUL and welcome back. Now recently, I had the pleasure of a conversation with an old friend of mine. We go way back now, and she's an artist who I've had the pleasure of watching her career, the evolution of her education and her career and her personal and financial life and her social life and all of these things. I've watched the evolution of her as an artist over the years and as an individual. And she reached out to me recently because things were technically much better off than they had ever been. She had access to studio space she never had before, a nice new beautiful studio space where she had friends working there as well, so she had people to hang out with and chat with during the day. She had financial stability she didn't have before, which gave her some freedom of mind to be more creative. She was objectively in a better place. But ironically, listening to her message, and the whole reason for her reaching out to me in the first place, was because she was more stressed and more overwhelmed than she had ever been. And boy, was that relatable. Because she's, at the same time, she's telling me that she's got this new opportunity. She's got this new freedom. She felt scared. She felt overwhelmed, and she had no clue what to do with this opportunity. And what I was thankful for when it came to her sharing this with me was that I've had very similar experiences in my life in multiple different situations that I learned to overcome as a professional. But it wasn't until I had a chance to hear her vocalize what she struggled with that it reinforced that experience in my life as a life lesson. It made me realize this is something I've taken for granted as a life lesson. It's just something I overcame through my own challenges, but it helped me to decide, listening to her helped me to decide to write this on the wall and say, Adam, don't forget this. This is important. And it was so important. What she'd shared with me was so important that I thought, no, this is not something I need to keep to myself. I want to reinforce this by making an art talk out of this, because we all need to learn this. And we all, if any of us listening as artists have any intention on becoming professionals, then this is something that we will face and we need to learn how to deal with. Different people react to these situations differently, but it affects us all one way or another. As I listened to her express her stress, I could hear it in her voice that she was stressed. She was being very authentic, and she reached out to me because she was really confused and bewildered why she was feeling stressed under such, quote, positive circumstances. And what clued me into what the problem was when she used the word big. I don't know if she used exactly that word big, but what she said, just paraphrasing what she said, was, I have access to this new space, to this bigger, better place, and I have more emotional freedom, aka a bigger space in my mind, but I don't know how to fill that space. I don't know what to do with this space. I'm in this new place and I don't know what to do with it. And I guess there might be the fear of not being able to buckle down and find an artistic focus, what to do with my career, what to do with this opportunity, the fear of squandering a good opportunity, or more specifically the guilt of squandering an opportunity. Somebody just hands you this opportunity on a platter and you don't know what the hell to do with yourself. And it immediately put her in this state of almost panic on what to do, because she felt this sudden obligation to fill this space, to fill these big shoes with something. And I found myself in this situation too, where, and I'm sure you have or will or fear this happening one day, where you spend your entire career struggling financially, struggling emotionally to achieve this dream, to reach this goal of being a professional artist, whatever type of artist you wish to turn out to be. And then one day, the most terrifying thing happens. After all of these years of trying to get, quote, that job, something terrifying happens. You get the job. And all of a sudden reality kicks in that, holy shit, on Tuesday, I'm going to meet my boss and they're going to give me a tour of my workspace, and I'm going to be meeting colleagues, and I'm going to be given a desk with a brand new fancy high-tech Cintiq, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God. Panic. Panic of what? Well, panic. Just panic of imposter syndrome, panic of performance, panic of acting like I feel at home and fitting into this completely question mark space. I have no idea what this place is going to... maybe I've seen it when I went to meet the boss, but I met them in this really fancy looking meeting room with glass walls and fancy looking chrome desks and nice lighting. This place scares the shit out of me. It's really cool looking, and there's like really cool art up on the walls of all the shows and films that they've produced in the studio, and there's all these really cool looking hipster guys walking around. She's got this like hippie dress, and this guy's got dreads, and she's got tattoos all over her body. Oh my God, I don't have any tattoos. I don't fit into this place. What am I going to do? I'm just going to walk into this little peon, and it scares the shit out of you. But you go. Yeah, I'm sure up until that point, if you've ever found yourself in a situation, the hours, days, minutes leading up to you walking in through the front door of this, quote, new job, you may have entertained the idea of jumping into your van and driving off into the sunset to be seen again, moving to some remote island in the middle of the ocean where, you don't ever have to face this kind of stress ever again. But you muster up the courage to show up at this job, and you walk in through the doors, and you look at the carpeting on the floor and the glass walls and the doors, and I guess that's the HR representative, and I don't know what this guy does, and am I gonna be friends with this guy? And then you walk into the studio space you're gonna be working in, and everybody turns and looks at the new guy walking in through the room, and you go, hey. And if you're even remotely shy, you're trying to look all cool, but you're sweating and blushing at the same time, and you're desperately trying not to come across as being completely awkward. And then your boss, who's been there probably for 5 years and is totally chill and has seen 60 million people go through panic attacks just like you, smacks you on the shoulder and says, you're going to be all right, buddy. Don't worry about it. Just chill out, have a seat. And everybody else kind of says hi, and they give you a friendly handshake, and they sit you at your desk, and then you're paired up with somebody who walks you through the logistics of the system, and everything's just kind of hitting you at the same time. There's this whole culture shock. And then the moment of truth. Your boss gives you some work to do, and you pick up the pen, and you open up Photoshop, and you start to draw. And then you draw. And you draw, and you draw, and then you keep fucking drawing, I guess, right? And then the day ends, and you go home, and your mother, or your father, or your friends, or whoever, or your cat looks at you and says, how did it go? And you look at them with this kind of spaced out look on your face, and you go, it was awesome, I guess. Yeah, I guess it was awesome. And you just start to unload your day on whoever it is who happens to be in the crossfire of your absolutely overwhelmed mind. And then you go to bed, and you wake up the next day, and you go back. And it's through this slow but sure day-by-day routine of going back to work, that by the time a week has passed, you already start to feel like you're getting your bearings. You're starting to get used to this place. You're starting to feel comfortable. The faces are familiar. You've seen that poster on the wall. It doesn't look so new to you. You wave hi. They recognize you. You recognize them. And you start to slowly find your place there. You start to personalize your little office space. You might have spent the first week or so just not bringing anything and not decorating, but as you get comfortable, you bring some pictures, some plants, some little doohickeys, whatever it is you can do to personalize your little workspace. Maybe it's an office, maybe it's a cubicle, maybe you're just sitting at a desk with a bunch of other people. My personal preference has always been an open concept where you're surrounded by colleagues. I've always liked that. I've never been a huge fan of closed offices. Always makes you feel alienated from everybody else. Another reason why being an artist can sometimes be more fun than being a director, right? Because you're not locked away. But that being said, maybe it's your own personal space. Like my friend who reached out to me. She had access to this beautiful studio with these people. She wasn't pressured. She didn't have that pressure of performing for a director. She didn't have the pressure of performing and impressing the people she worked in this studio space with. But she was equally scared and overwhelmed. She was equally lost. In fact, there's a new fear. There's a new preoccupation, and that's, I have to fill this space. I have to find work to do. I have to occupy this new environment. I have to make use of this new environment. And up until that point, there were no pre-plans on how to do that. She never thought she was ever going to be there. It just kind of landed on her lap, and now here she is, and it's amazing and awesome and cool. But what does she do? And that operative word that she shared with me was big. To her, in her mind and physically to her, this environment, this space felt big because she was used to her little cocoon. She was used to her little cozy space. And now she left this cozy space and she found herself in this foreign environment where it smells and sounds and looks different. And that's the mistake. This is the mistake, or at least the misconception that I had, that I kind of had to overcome through sink or swim when it came to working in a studio. When you work in a studio, you get hired, the space it pre-exists for you, they sit you down, they provide you with the resources you need to draw, and you adapt. When you're in a studio where it's your own studio space, whether it be a home studio or whether it be, an outside of your house studio space, in your mind, you feel this, at least at the beginning, this need to, quote, fill this space. And the problem with doing that is the fact that you're trying to adapt yourself to the environment. And that's the mistake. When you're an artist, your work environment is your cocoon. And when you move from one place to another, you have to tailor that cocoon to what feels right to you. And whether or not your, quote, studio space is, a 10 by 10 foot little square box room with a little computer and a little desk and a little screen, or it's a huge, bricked interior loft space with 15-foot windows on the wall and, and industrial pipes everywhere. It looks all kind of lofty and cool and neat with some old industrial lamps and, and cool chrome desks. Whatever space you find yourself in, you need to tailor it to your own personal space. You have to bring you into that space. And if you are emotionally an intimate, introvert, small, quiet person who indulges in little things and who finds creative space in little things, then you need to emotionally and physically bring that into your new space. You need to bring your little cocoon with you. Changing your size, changing the size of your mind, changing the size of your physical space emotionally and physically will knock you off your pedestal. It'll knock you off of your creative path. And you need to recreate it for yourself. When that studio space grows, it's because you have filled this space emotionally. You have filled the space physically with you, and you feel the need and desire to grow it. My studio space that I have right here in my home is my little wonderland. It's a physical representation of my emotional self. And it needs to be a reflection of me, how I organize it, the colors, the placement, everything I have in this space needs to stimulate me emotionally. I had that talk. I was talking about expanding my space, expanding my canvas into my studio, expanding my canvas onto my body, into the jewelry, into the clothes that I wear, into my fashion, into everything. An expansion of myself, but it started within me. And the reason she felt overwhelmed, the reason her voice was quivering, was because her body and her mind was not emotionally ready to expand yet, but her physical space had. So she felt this obligation to grow. And what I told her is, don't. The worst thing you can do artistically is give yourself too much space and too much resource. I've quoted Guillermo del Toro in the past, where somebody had asked him in a stage interview, what would you do if somebody gave you an unlimited budget? And he said, giving an artist an unlimited budget is a death sentence. It's like throwing somebody into the middle of the ocean and saying, sink or swim, bud. They'll eventually sink. What you got to do is you got to give them a little life raft, a little boat with a little paddle, and they'll find a way of making it work. But don't give people the ocean. Just give that artist a little wading pool. And then when they feel comfortable with that, give them a little swimming pool, a little blow-up swimming pool. And then when that's big enough, when they're too big for that, give them a regular-sized pool. And then when they get comfortable with that, give them an Olympic-sized pool. But that artist needs to choose what size pool fits them. And if you struggle in an Olympic-sized pool, if you feel out of your element, if you can't create anymore, it's because you're trying to fill a space that's too big. And I'm not only speaking physically, I'm speaking emotionally. How does this mentality, how does this philosophy translate into creating art in general? This is such an important artistic lesson. Think of all of the artists you can think of online that produce art that is very well known. And there's a multitude of different artists out there. But think of Anthony Jones. Think of Ahmed Al-Duri. Think of Bobby Chu. Think of Tyler Edlin. Think of Cynics. Think of Clint Kearley. Think of Ethan Becker. Think of Loish. Think of Ross Draws. Think of all of these artists. And if you pay close attention to what they do, you're going to notice a common trait that they all possess. Every single one of these artists possess this. Charles Bernard, another excellent example. They start small. They always start small. Even when they're doing something that's technically objectively big, like Tyler Edlin's very elaborate environment sketches, the physical space that they are representing might be objectively huge, right? Like Tyler does these huge, beautiful, intricate looking landscapes. But pay attention to how he starts his images. He always starts with this very simple shape. Anthony Jones, he ends up with these characters that are detailed and elaborate and textured and graphically gorgeous. But he starts with this little basic blob, this little lump of clay. And that lump of clay that he starts with is not this super complex wiry shape. It's a little basic shape. And then he very slowly, very thoughtfully, no rush, expands out from this basic shape. Bobby Chu, look at his little sketch. He starts with this little slow drawing. His hand moves 2 millimeters a second. It's this little thoughtful brushstroke. He's slow, he's thoughtful, and his shape is very simple. Okay? And you'll notice that they start simple. They start in their little cocoon. Their drawing is a little cocoon. It's an easy, manageable, simple image. And then once they have expanded their thought process beyond this little cocoon, it slowly expands and expands and expands into something bigger and more elaborate. Guaranteed, if you are trying to work on a piece of art, or if you have tried to work on an art piece that felt out of your control, that felt overwhelming, that felt like you just kind of lost touch with it, it just kind of fell apart, 9 chances out of 10 is because you bit off more than you could chew. You started off with an idea that was just too complex. You were trying to manage too many things. You ate up too much, quote, bandwidth, as Marco Bucci would say. There's another perfect example. Marco Bucci. The complexity of the light and the color and the texture that he paints. But if you look at the shapes and the graphic structure of his images, you could not find a more minimalist artist than Marco Bucci. But look at how grandiose his paintings end up feeling and looking. He draws one of his favorite characters is this green ball character with a very, very simplified little boy. He's done multitudes of different paintings. He's studied this little character over and over and over again. It's kind of like his go-to plaything sketch type of idea that he uses to grow artistically amongst all the other illustrations he does. But he starts with something very simple. Marco Bucci, being a phenomenal teacher from Toronto, is an incredibly good teacher and advocate for simplifying, purging yourself of distracting thoughts and focusing on what matters. Ahmed Al-Duri, who's probably one of the best modern day fantasy illustrator, Sargent-esque artists you're going to see out there, who's since I've ever known him as a YouTuber, has been an advocate for focusing on what matters, purging the distractions, creating simple shapes and values and colors. I quote him, and he's a reference that I share with my own students when I teach. It's all about simplification. One of the main philosophies I teach my students is mastery has nothing to do with the complexity of your thought, but on how you can simplify those things that are complicated. Instead of trying to adapt yourself to a big, complicated, scary world, instead, you learn how to miniaturize this big, complex world into something small and manageable for you. And you scale it down to exactly the size that feels right to you. You're not trying to fill big shoes. No, you're trying to take those big shoes and shrink them down to fit you. You own your space. And this is at the core of one of the most fundamental lessons that I've learned artistically, that I quote time and time again, and it has been so fundamentally important not only in my career as an artist, in my philosophy as an artist, as a teacher, and through my life lessons, through my daily personal life lessons and struggles and things I've overcome over my entire life. One of the most important lessons I've ever learned, that I ended up tattooing on my arm, and I annoy people with how often I reference is know thyself. And this falls into that aspect of knowing yourself. One of the most important things you can and ever will do as a human being, as a professional, as a father, as a mother, as a sister, as a brother, as an uncle, as anything, is to know who you are and know your place in it. And by knowing yourself, meaning embracing who you are. And as my friend had said the other day, confiding in yourself, trusting yourself, knowing who you are and adapting the world to you. And what my friend did, what she was struggling with that day when she reached out to me, was she was trying to adapt herself to the world rather than trying to adapt the world to her. And what I told her is, I want you to reflect back on these little greenhouses that you produce, these little intimate worlds. She'd make these little greenhouses that made me think of The Friendly Giant. When I was a kid, there was a show I loved called The Friendly Giant, and he had these little chairs and these little doors, this kind of little playhouse. I loved that show, and there was something incredibly accepting, and there was something incredibly comforting and simple about him placing this big giant of a man placing these little chairs in this little order and closing little doors. It was a little world. And you grow up as a child looking at the world close up. And one of the things that we do as adults very often is our eyes become physically distant from the intimate things in the world. It's one of the reasons I love macro photography. It brings you close up to nature. It brings you right up face to face with the smaller things in the world. And there's this simplicity that you realize that even in the tiniest little recesses of this planet, if you take a macro lens and you look at a flower so close up that it feels like it's the size of a skyscraper, you realize that the grandeur of something has nothing to do with its physical size. Grandeur is about how much of yourself you inject into the simple little world that you live in, rather than being able to fill this humongous space. And if you find yourself artistically in a place right now where you're overwhelmed, either with your circumstances, you're overwhelmed with how many things you need to manage logistically in your life, be it financial or family, or whether you're just sitting in front of a canvas right now, painting as you're listening to me, fed up because you can't get the damn thing done and you just don't know how to get this stupid thing to work. My suggestion to you is step back, look at it, and ask yourself, just how big a shoe am I trying to fill right now? And if it's too big, then take the shoe off, shrink it down, and start over with something very, very simple. Start off with a little basic shape. Start off with one little statement. Start off with that. Then slowly and slowly build it into something that's manageable. And if it's your personal life, if you feel that there are just too many things for you to manage, finances, kids, rent, renovations, job, commute, etc., stop. Look at one little thing that you can manage and only pick the thing that's the easiest to manage. Not something complicated. Something simple, easy to manage. Look at it, forget about everything else, address it, own it, fix it, and then move on to the next easiest thing. And by the time you get to that most complicated thing, to that thing that you were so worried about, probably taxes, because everybody hates doing taxes, right? But that thing, that last thing that you put off, not only will it feel so much easier to deal with because it's going to be the only thing you need to worry about, but you will have created this inertia in your productivity because you weren't trying to deal with everything simultaneously. No, you found a way to simplify your life, find a way to tackle these things one at a time, that by the time you got to this, you've already created enough inertia and movement that tackling it will be that much easier. And when you're tackling that project, if doing your taxes is overwhelming, then don't try to tackle the whole thing simultaneously. Break it down into smaller bite sizes. Every single time you find yourself facing a challenge, if it's challenging, if it's overwhelming, then it's not your job to adapt yourself to the grandeur of it, rather to adapt it to the smallness that is you, and all of a sudden you'll be able to manage it just fine. All right? With that said, I love you all with all my heart, and happy painting.